Right guys, it's time to get all technical and look at the juicy raw numbers because we have our first benchmarks for the brand new M3 chipsets and the data is certainly promising. Let's begin with the base M3 chipset because I was very curious as to how this could perform. Could it now match or exceed previous Pro and Max chipsets? And well, yes, it certainly can. The M3 chipset scored around 3,000 points in the single-core test and 11,700 points in the multi-core test on Geekbench. Now, this is in line with Apple's claim that these chips are 20% faster than M2, and I do want to actually address this opinion people are sharing online where they're claiming Apple's silicon has become boring. And well, of course it has. The problem M1 created for Apple, I guess, is that because it was such a huge leap forwards over the Intel Macs, people are still expecting similar jumps, but that just won't be the case. Apple Silicon had already peaked on the iPhone around the time of the A12's release. Ever since, it's been minor upgrades, and so similar to the iPhone chips, expect small but consistent jumps in performance each year with these new M series chips. And by the way, would like to remind you guys, like this video and subscribe for more content like this, it would be appreciated. And to be fair, with things like COVID and the chip shortage in Apple's way, the fact they have been consistent and have been improving these chips, and how they perform by around 20% year over year is impressive nevertheless. So I'm definitely not disappointed by these chips. As I said in a previous video, my slight disappointment lies with the M3 Pro because of its weird downgrades, which I'll get to guys, and also 8 gigs of base memory on the 14-inch base M3, but apart from that, I'm happy with this refresh. These are great Macs at the end of the day. Anyways, coming back to M3, the exciting thing about these numbers is that the multi-core score is about the same as last year's base M2 Pro chipset, and also the M1 Max from the previous year. Both these chips scored 12,185 and 12,136 points respectively, so the fact Apple's base level chips can now stand toe-to-toe with their best laptop chips that were just released 2 years ago is incredible, guys. In fact, it gets me tingly everywhere about the M3 MacBook Air because making this sort of power accessible and available to everyone with their cheapest laptops is going to be awesome for us consumers. Yes, we don't know about the thermals yet, and based on the A17 Pro, some might be worried about overheating, but remember guys, Apple fixed that completely with a software update, and considering overheating on the M2 was overblown, I'm pretty confident M3 is going to be perfectly fine in the MacBook Air. Also, what's even more impressive to me is that Apple's giving us these pretty respectable performance gains whilst offering incredible endurance. Remember, the 14-inch machines in previous years only offered around 18 hours of video playback, but now M3 can match those higher-end machines performance-wise and also offer way more endurance. It gets you 22 hours of video playback, so that's pretty insane. And for those still using the base M1 chipset like myself, that scores around 8,315 points in Geekbench's multi-core test. So again, that shows you how big of a jump M3 is in just 3 years. Now, we do have some GPU numbers for M3 and the results are certainly interesting. So in the GFX Bench Aztec Ruins high tier off-screen test, the M3 achieved around 52 frames per second, whereas the M2 achieved 48 frames per second, so that means M3's GPU with the same core count is 7.4% faster, which is barely anything. It's a minor upgrade and it's a little less than what I was expecting. I guess we all got too hyped about 3nm, but again guys, for most consumers, the GPUs are still plenty powerful, and remember, with the addition of hardware ray tracing, that should make a big difference to the actual gaming experience. So here's hoping game developers take advantage of that and bring more of their games to Macs. Now, by the way, for those curious, it seems these results are from a Mac with the identifier Mac 15,3, which, based on what Gurman told us, is likely referring to the base MacBook Pro. So again guys, it's very impressive we're getting this kind of performance on Apple's entry-level Pro machine. I still wish it didn't come with 8 gigs of RAM as standard, but regardless guys, I'm happy with the performance upgrades. Moving to M3 Pro, we have nothing for this chip at the time of filming. Not a single benchmark has leaked, and that's certainly surprising If I were to guess, I'm assuming Apple did not even bother giving these out to reviewers. As I've discussed in a previous video, the M3 Pro is a bit of a weird upgrade. So compared to the M2 Pro, Apple for some reason has given us 2 less performance cores, 25% less memory bandwidth, and also 1 less GPU core. Now I do understand the regression in memory bandwidth could be because of the dynamic caching technology. This basically makes swap memory on these Macs a lot smoother, so I guess you won't see a huge difference, but it's still weird to me they're skimping out some features with a pro level chipset. Now I could understand if Apple did something like this with M3 because that's the base model with the tighter margins, and most regular consumers won't see a big difference anyways, but no, the M3 and the M3 Max are pretty solid upgrades over their respective predecessors. However, M3 Pro is this odd side grades. The one fewer GPU core isn't a massive issue considering the individual cores are still much faster on M3, and even Apple said on stage it's still 10% faster than M2 Pro, but I do wonder how CPU performance is gonna be on the M3 Pro, especially since they did not even bother comparing the M3 Pro to the M2 Pro on stage. Now, if I were to guess, I'm thinking CPU performance is gonna be about the same as M2 Pro, and much like M3, there's gonna be slight GPU upgrades over its predecessor. But guys, it's a bit sad. They made the Pro worse to upsell consumers to the Max, and now that the base M3 performs about the same as the double-binned M2 Pro, the performance gap between these two chipsets just got much smaller, and many could of course get away using the M3. Of course, Apple, being the masters of upselling, gave the M3 a major Achilles heel in the form of 8 gigs of RAM, so I can see many still getting the M3 Pro anyways for the additional RAM, but it's still sad how they've butchered the Pro chipset. Anyways, moving to M3 Max, this is where the real performance upgrades are, and the data is very impressive, guys. So the Mac that's seemingly been tested with the M3 Max has the identifier Mac 15,9, and that's likely to be the 16-inch, which makes sense since Apple usually sends out the highest end configuration to reviewers. So in this case, it's probably the $7,000 maxed out M3 Max 16-inch in the fancy new space black colorway. Anyways, the M3 Max scored a similar single core score to M3, of course, but the multi-core is a ludicrous 21,084, which makes the M3 Max in a bloody MacBook as fast as the M2 Ultra in desktops, since that averaged 21,182 in the Mac Pro and 21,316 in the Mac Studio. That's just bonkers, especially since M2 Ultra had only just released a few months back at WWDC. So this, as a result, makes the M3 Max in the new 16-inch 45% faster than the M2 Max, which blows my mind. Considering the M2 Max had only released in Jan, these performance upgrades within a year is pretty insane. Clearly they went all out for the highest end chipset, but these numbers make sense considering that for the first time, the Max variant has a higher CPU count compared to its Pro counterpart. In fact, the M2 Max and Pro were mainly differentiated by the GPU, but this time, the Max and Pro are basically different chips. Now, if you're wondering how this compares to the M3 Max and the base M3, let me remind you guys, those scored 12,185 and 11,836 respectively, so once again guys, as one expects, the M3 Max is a lot more powerful and offers ludicrous performance, but let me remind you guys, you likely do not need this. The base M3 is still likely fine for 90% of consumers. However, it's fun to see all these extreme numbers and how far Apple can push Apple Silicon. And just to rub more salt into Intel's wound, the M3 Max actually matches their i9-3900KS chipset, which uses 150 watts of power. That's a lot more power hungry than the M3 Max. Now, we haven't seen any GPU benchmarks leak just yet, but either way guys, what we've seen so far is very impressive, and if you have the cash to splurge, M3 Max is really the way to go. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.